Hi and welcome to the podcast. As this is a new channel, I thought I'd briefly try and explain what we're going to be doing here and what we're going to be covering. So ultimately, we're going to be looking at professional golf, and we're going to be looking at the three major men's tours. That's the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, LIV Golf, and we'll also be looking at the LPGA Tour as well. Additional to this, we'll be looking at any relevant news surrounding the tour. Is there any information coming out, any gossip that we need to be aware of? And as we begin to come into the bigger events, major season, and events such as the President's Cup, Ryder Cup and Solheim Cup, what we'll be doing is we'll be providing a more extensive coverage around that time with build up to the event, discussion during the event, and a breakdown of what happened afterwards. Right, so that's the basic premise of what we're going to be doing here on the channel and for this podcast. So let's get on and let's have a look at what's happened in the last week of professional golf. So first off, let's look at the PGA Tour, which is now coming towards the end of its FedEx full season. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, the FedEx full season is just far too complicated for me to actually fully get a grip on. And I'm going to try and break it down a little bit here, just in case you feel the same way, and probably it's going to help me out as well. So ultimately, after the end of the main regular season, the FedEx Full provides a series of events that allow people the chance to try and get into the top 100 players in the FedEx Cup rankings. Now, from 2026, only the top 100 players will have full status on the PGA Tour, and anyone outside that will have either some kind of status or no status at all. And the full season allows for the people who are ranked 50 and below to battle it out and try and obviously get their automatic place on the PGA Tour for 2026. This appears to be the main premise of the FedEx full season, but as well as that, there is the ability for players who aren't already set up to be in the first signature events of the year to get themselves into a position where they can get their automatic qualification for that via the Aon series that allows people to qualify through form for the signature events. Right, so hopefully that's kind of cleared up if there were any queries about the exceptionally overcomplicated PGA Tour season and these full series of events. So let's now have a little look and a recap at what happened at this week's event. So this week's tournament was the Worldwide Technologies event, and basically it contained the majority of the field that you would expect in the full series, which is the people trying to retain their cards, but also a couple of bigger names did actually show up to the event, and one of those was Ben Griffin, who is sponsored by Worldwide Technology, so obviously was there as part of his sponsorship deal. Now, like I say, he's already a winner on the PGA Tour, already in the top 50 of the FedEx Cup, doesn't need to be playing something like this event, but obviously sponsorship means that he was obviously obliged to play this event. And it appears his class rose to the top. He won the Worldwide Technologies event from last week and now becomes only the third person this season to win 3 PGA Tour events, and puts him in the rarefied air of names like Scottie Scheffler and Rory McIlroy. So what a breakout season it's really been for Ben Griffin. Not only has he had 3 wins, he was also one of the better players on the US Ryder Cup team, and now finds himself in the rarefied air of being one of only 3 three-time winners this year on tour, with the other 2 being clearly the best 2 players in the world. So congratulations to Ben Griffin. What a season it's been, and hopefully he can take that form into 2026 and continue to build on what he's done in 2025, which has basically been a breakout phenomenal year for him. So the other main stories around this event are all around people who are trying to get their PGA Tour cards for next season by completing in the FedEx Full Series. And basically I just want to highlight 3 of those players for you here because I think it's really important that we do that. The first one is Garrick Higgo. Now he's having an amazing Full Series, and basically he's now recorded 4 top 10s in a row since the Pro Tour Championship. Now that's moved him firmly up on the FedEx rankings, and his position on the tour is now secured, although he already had a win, which does give him some exemptions. But basically, he's going to be there or thereabouts, and probably with this form, looks like he's going to be one of the people that will take up some of these positions at the signature event. It's been a fantastic few weeks for the guy, and I hope that obviously it continues for the next couple and he can end his season on the massive high and just finish riding that ride that he's on at the moment, because he's just playing some phenomenal golf and can't stop finishing in the top few places. I think the other two players that we want to discuss here are Sami Välimäki and Chad Ramey. Now, they both tied for second place here at the Worldwide Technology, and that basically for them practically almost seals their position in the top 100 and gains them their cards for next year. There does tend to be some movement and there can be big jumps, but routinely we're not talking tens of people per week that swap places. So with these guys now both appearing in the 70s and 80s within the FedEx list, they both now appear comfortably within the cut mark. And that's interesting because, like I say, that just goes to show you that ultimately a really, really good week throughout the full series can actually make a significant difference if you're in a reasonable place to start off with. If you've had an absolutely horrific season to this point, then obviously you've got an awful lot of catching up to do. But if you've been there or thereabouts and you're sitting somewhere in the low to mid 100s, putting in a good week or a good couple of weeks here and there could really actually elevate you up and get you into that position where you're sitting inside the top 100 and in a position where you feel reasonably comfortable that you'll maintain that position. So I think huge credit to Sami Välimäki and Chad Ramey this week for really putting in fantastic performances and basically playing for their livelihoods and pulling it out when it was needed. So we now kind of move into the last couple of weeks of the FedEx Full Series, and we're starting to look at players that are on the bubble. Now, like I say, it's very difficult to say who will and who won't, who can and who can't, because a win in any one of these two events could just shoot you straight up the board, or a couple of players playing well while you're not, if you're in the 90s, could actually drop you out of the top 100. But I think it's important to have a look at some of the players that are around the bubble mark that people may be going, what? They're around the bubble mark, but already have their cards available to them through previous results and previous year's victories. And those basically are players like Tom Kim. Now, he's had a really poor season in 2025, but he has status because of previous on the PGA Tour, and obviously maintains a card through 2026 for then. But he's going to need to find a shed load of form through 2026 if he's going to be able to then continue the progress that he should be making. He's a great young golfer, and I think he's just lost his way slightly this year. And I think 2026 is going to be a big year for Tom Kim. Can he really just push on, or has he reached a point where things are just way harder than perhaps they should be for someone of his talent? A couple of the other notable names just to note down are Max Homa. Obviously, again, he's having a really weird couple of years in general, but again, has status through previous victories through 2026. So although he's sitting around the bubble mark, he's still got playing privileges, and hopefully, again, he starts to find some significant form in 2026 because he's just too good a player to be where he is at the moment. He should consistently be inside the top 50 on the PGA Tour and looking at picking up victories every single year. The final person is Adam Scott. Now, again, he already maintains status for 2026, but it is quite surprising that we've tended to see him this year appearing to be involved in a lot of competitions and a lot of tournaments, but that seems to be early on in the tournament, and it feels like he's struggled to put 4 really good rounds together practically all year. And I think what that's then caused is him to drop down these rankings and appear at a level that probably no one thought he would be, which is around the 100 bubble. Like I say, no problem with his playing privileges for next year. He's already part of that. And I would expect that even if he doesn't qualify as right for the signature events due to his status on the tour, the fact that he's been part of the policy board, and the fact that he's one of the most well-known and longest running faces on the PGA Tour. I would be surprised if sponsors' invites weren't handed out to him straight away for the signature events. So no issues there, but I thought it worth being interesting to flag 2 or 3 players who sit around that 100 mark that perhaps you might not expect to see there. Okay, so let's move on to this week's tournament, and this is the Butterfield Bermuda Championship, which is in Bermuda, obviously. It's played at Port Royal Golf Course, which is a Robert Trent Jones design from 1970. It's a par 71, it's 6,828 yards in length, so not long compared to a PGA Tour course, which normally are well over 7,000 yards and can head up to things like 7,500 and above. So it will be interesting to see if that favours any players specifically, or whether it's just going to be a question of whoever plays the best and gets the ball in the hole quickest is going to be the winner, no matter where their strengths or weaknesses lie. So winners from the last few years are not your biggest names, and again I think that shows the status of this event and where it sits within the full series. You've got names like Rafael Campos last year and Camilo Villegas and Seamus Power in prior events. So guys that would be looking to obviously build their tour card, and in this winter series, in this fall series, trying to obviously maintain their playing privileges and obviously then getting to the point where they pick up a win, pick up a couple of years exemption, and then can hopefully move along with their careers. There's no predictions from me really for this event. I think, like I said, there's so many people that are fighting for their tour cards that to say one person is going to have a better chance than others in the field as it is, I think is probably folly for me to do so. I think a number of the higher ranked players from the PGA Tour are either playing the DP World Finals, which we'll obviously talk about in a moment, or they're on their prolonged winter break, having already qualified. So don't expect to see too many really big names at this event. Look for it to be more the players that are really scrapping to maintain their jobs for next year. Okay, so that's the PGA Tour covered. So now let's have a look at the DP World Tour, which at this time of year is really interesting because it's starting to now reach its climax. This week just gone, we've had the penultimate event, and this week coming is the DP World Tour Finals. So we've got some big competitions with some big names on some big golf courses looking to create some big history. So the way the DP World Tour Championship works is fairly similar to how the FedEx Cups works, in the fact that the top 50 players on the DP World Tour have qualified to play in this event. But before we actually get into that event, let's have a look back at this week's Abu Dhabi HSBC Championship and recap that. So the tournament was low scoring, with the winner shooting 25 under par and that only being good enough to get into a playoff. The playoff was between Aron Rai from England and Tommy Fleetwood from England. And they had a one-hole playoff, and Aron Rai made birdie on the first playoff hole, which was enough to capture the title. This is Aron Rai's third DP Tour win and also seals his place at the Tour Championship. He played mainly PGA Tour this year, so his starts on the DP World Tour were limited, and obviously this good result is what shoved him into the top 50. Aron Rai is a very interesting character, especially when it comes to his equipment. He's known on the tour as just being a very accurate player, and he hits an awful lot of fairways, an awful lot of greens, and doesn't do a lot wrong. But he does have some very, very quirky things happening around his game. First of all, he wears 2 gloves, one on both hands, which is unknown apart from maybe Phil Mickelson in the rain in professional golf. That's just habitual from him being a child and a younger golfer in England when it was really cold, and it became habitual for him to put 2 gloves on, and he's continued to do that as that's how he feels comfortable playing. He's also really unusual in being a person that has iron head covers. Now, obviously, again, this stems back to his childhood and wanting to protect stuff that he actually has and equipment that he actually owns. Obviously, it's slightly different now, but it becomes one of those habits and I guess one of those things that he doesn't want to change because it's been like that for so long. And I think that's fair enough. I feel slightly sorry for his caddy being the only one that has to try and manage all of those iron head covers, because I know golfers that play with iron head covers and routinely they just fall off while they're walking around and they're constantly losing them. But that's another interesting quirk in how Aron Rai approaches the game. The third one, and I think is really, really interesting, we saw both Tommy Fleetwood and Rory McIlroy turn up at this event with TaylorMade's brand new QI4D driver. Now, this was interesting from Rory's perspective specifically because he struggled last year with TaylorMade's QI35 driver and remained for the majority of the season in their previous model, the QI10. Now, obviously, we know that TaylorMade will want to get their top tour staff into their new equipment and advertise it as being the latest and greatest thing. So having the world number 2 player not putting that in the bag is obviously something that was slightly concerning for them. They managed to get the QI4D onto the USGA conforming list at the start of this week just gone, prior to the event. So it wasn't really unsurprising to see some players playing that driver. Now, Tommy Fleetwood doesn't seem to have this driver issue. Pretty much seems that each year TaylorMade bring out something, he shoves it in the bag and away he goes. Whereas Rory McIlroy is much more susceptible to having a driver that he likes to hit. So still very interesting that he's immediately put the QI4D in, and the fact that he drove the ball pretty well and shot a 62 on the final day to finish high up the leaderboard, which we'll talk about shortly. But back to Aron Rai, one of the other interesting factors about him is the fact that he is still playing a TaylorMade M6 driver that's 6 years old. Now again, this goes to show how much he cares and likes specific equipment and doesn't change for the sake of changing. But it is very unusual to see a person who's rocking a 6-year-old driver on any tour in golf, because obviously they have access to lots of other kit, even if they don't have a direct contract with a manufacturer. So it's very interesting to see that. And it does just go to show, I guess, that, you know, driver technology, although it has moved along incrementally, if a tour player feels that they can still compete with a 6-year-old driver, then it goes to show that shots smack out the middle of that club probably aren't going to be performing a lot better or a lot worse than shots hit out the middle of drivers that are just about to be released or have been released in the last year or so. So very, very interesting from my perspective. So back to Rory McIlroy, he's been the leader on the race to Dubai, and basically this just appears to be a series of events that basically allows Rory McIlroy to take home another massive paycheck. He's consistently been winning on the DP World Tour, on the race to Dubai. He's won a few years in a row now, and I think if he wins this year, it will be his 7th title. And that gets him very close to Colin Montgomery's record, 8 wins on the European Tour Order of Merit. And this 62 that he had on the final day was really, really good for him, because that moved him up into a tie for 3rd place, and basically then meant that he increased his margin of lead over Marco Penge, who's been a regular on the DP World Tour this year and has played some fantastic golf. So although there are people who can win, there's plenty of points still available. It's 2,000 points for the final event. It really kind of is going to be that unless Rory McIlroy has an absolute disaster and Marco Penge does really, really well, it's probably likely between one of those two as to who's going to actually take home the actual season-long race on the DP World Tour. And likely, based on the status that we have at the moment, Rory McIlroy is probably going to now take down 4 in a row, we believe. As a final bit of news, Matthew Jordan was the final person in to the Tour finals. He played a fantastic tournament and again finished high enough up where he jumped from being outside the top 50 into the top 50 in 50th place and secured his place at the DP World Tour Championships. So congratulations to Matthew Jordan for actually putting a game in place when he desperately needed it to get into that final event. Okay, so let's have a look at a quick preview of the DP World Tour Championships. And we're heading to Jumeirah Golf Estates, the Earth Course in Dubai, where again, these top 50 players will battle it out to not only win the tournament, but to be crowned the DP Tour champion. It's a big, long course. It's 7,706 yards. Now compare that to the Bermuda that we talked about from the PGA Tour this week. We're talking nearly 1,000 yards longer in total. This is 7,706 yards and is a par 72. As it's the top 50 players in the rankings, expect to see a reasonably stacked DP World Tour event. And obviously recent winners will prove that by being Rory McIlroy, Jon Rahm, Colin Morikawa, and Matt Fitzpatrick. And that tends to show that the cream of the crop of European golf normally tends to rise to the top for this final event. So who wins the tournament is obviously yet to be determined, but with players like McIlroy, Fleetwood, Hatton and Penge all obviously in exceptional form and heading in, you'd probably be hard fought to look at anybody else. But ultimately you do have 50 of the best players on the DP World Tour all there, and anybody who tees it up could win this event. Like I say, it looks like it's probably more likely to be a straight battle between McIlroy and Penge for the overall winner of the points on the DP World Tour system. And obviously McIlroy has a greater than 700 points advantage. So unless he has an absolute disaster, which seems unlikely at a golf course that he knows really well and really likes, you would probably expect to see him take home the overall tour title for another time. Okay, so that's the DP World Tour and PGA Tour done. So although the LIV Golf season has long finished, this week we did have some massive news coming out of the tour. And that is that they've decided to move their event from 54 holes to 72 holes. Now, this has brought out a ton of memes and some fun because LIV, L-I-V, is actually the Roman numerals for 54. And obviously everyone is now saying, is this tour now going to be called the LXXII Tour? Because obviously that's what 72 is in Roman numerals. So it's been quite interesting and quite fun. I think what we want to do is try and break this down and see where we are, why this has happened, and what we think the outcome will be and how it will be received, because it is quite a big step change for this tour. It now brings it in line with virtually every other professional golf event across the major tours, across the world, but LIV ultimately sold itself as being different, being new, being something that wasn't the norm, and yet gradually we're seeing this being eroded and gradually it becoming what appears to be much more of a normal professional golf tour. So I think the first thing that we're obviously going to be looking at is the fact that this is LIV's, again, push towards getting their players official world golf ranking points in the OWGR. Now, we know that LIV Golf applied for this right at the very start, and it's always been a big sticking point for the tour. The players who have moved to LIV are gradually falling down the OWGR rankings and are now struggling to get into the majors. And obviously the tour is beginning to look slightly weaker from a statistics perspective, just purely because the amount of players that now don't sit in the top 50 in the world, where you had players like Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, and those kind of high-level players that were at the top of their game in the top 10 of the world, they've now gradually fallen out over the last 2 to 3 years and are now sitting outside the top 50, outside the top 100. And that, in effect, appears to look like it's weakening the tour. So LIV Golf have really been pushing to try and get world golf rankings, and they obviously failed for a number of reasons. Partly, it could be to do with the fact that it's 54 holes, but that seemed to be the least point for sticking. It appeared to be more the fact that it was quite a closed house. There wasn't a lot of meritocracy or ways for people to qualify to play in LIV Golf. You basically had to be invited, contracted and paid to play. And when they did have an odd couple of places available, those sometimes didn't get taken, or sometimes people couldn't qualify for them correctly. And that caused a problem. I think also you had this problem where you had the captains of this team event who were actually contracted to be the captains, and up until last season actually couldn't be relegated from the league. So you didn't have this where if Dustin Johnson plays rubbish golf for the whole year, he gets kicked out because he had a captain's contract. Now, that did change this year, and again, is another factor that I think helps to get that feeling that LIV is really trying to push towards getting official world golf rankings for its players. Obviously, when Jon Rahm joined the series, he was obviously quite vocal on the fact that he would much prefer to play 72-hole golf, although I think the general consensus of most people on LIV was that they were quite enjoying the fact that it was 3 days instead of 4. It made the travel more acceptable. They were obviously being paid a lot of money to play less golf. That allowed them to maintain their longevity and to keep up with, family commitments, etc. So it'd be interesting to see how the majority of the people, especially the ones that have been there a long time, really do feel about 72-hole competition over 4 days, as opposed to what they've been used to playing 54 holes, because basically now they're going to be asked to do more work but not be paid any more money. I think what will be interesting is if we get to the point where LIV Golf is then perceived to be able to gain official world golf rankings, and I think there's still some sticking points around the meritocracy and people being able to play their way into the league and people falling out of the league. There's also the problem around the team competition element, in the fact that you're playing team golf at the same time as you're playing individual golf, and that query as to whether could be an impact on trying to work for your team while you're also trying to work as an individual, and whether that has any impact on the OWGR rankings. Now, it's really interesting when obviously this news broke and someone spoke to Rory McIlroy about this, because one of the things he raised, which is probably slightly true, is that now so many of the players on LIV Golf have, again, as I've said, dropped out of the top 50 or even lower in the rankings, that should OWGR now offer ranking points to that tour, the perceived level of the players on that tour is now significantly lower. So the amount of OGR world ranking points, which is normally based on the strength of the field, would obviously be diminished, because you wouldn't have that many, say, top 10 players in the world. You'd probably have Rahm, DeChambeau, and maybe Till Hatton. Not quite sure where Joaquin Niemann sits now, but he's certainly not, the best player in the world, not according to the world rankings. So the amount of points available to these guys going forward could be significantly reduced, which would then make it harder for them to claw their way back to the level that they would like to be, because obviously someone winning a PGA Tour event would gain significantly more official world golf ranking points than someone winning a LIV event, basically because of the size of the field and the quality of the players that are playing in it. But it's a very interesting thing, and it's really interesting to see how far LIV Golf is willing to bend its principles or this new idea of what it wanted golf to be able to match itself to the established rules of world golf as a whole. Right, so let's head over to the LPGA Tour to close out the podcast this week. So the LPGA Tour has been on a tour of the Far East recently, and that makes sense for them. It's interesting in the fact that women's golf has a significantly higher percentage of players on the tour that are from Asia and the Far East than, say, some of the men's tours do. So being able to put a few events back to back in that area is exceptionally beneficial for the LPGA Tour in visibility and money generation, and people being able to see the golfers that they watch on TV, but more in their home countries. And this week it was the Toto Japan Classic. with the field ultimately being dominated by a number of the homes nation players. Literally half or more of the top 20 or 30 players in that event were from Japan. So very interesting to see how home field advantage and playing in your own country can actually impact how well you actually play and how you feel comfortable out on the golf course. So Nasa Hataoka and Yuna Arakai both finished 15 under par, with the event being won on the first playoff hole by Hataoka. Nasa Hataoka now has 7 career wins on the LPGA Tour at just 26 years of age. You've got to say that's just really impressive for someone of that age. She now sits in 11th place in the race to the CM Globe rankings, with just the complicated named ANNIKA driven by Gainbridge event left before the Tour Championship for the LPGA Tour, which takes place on the 20th to the 23rd of November. So this week's LPGA Tour is back in America, in Florida, at, as I have mentioned, the rather complicatedly named the ANNIKA driven by Gainbridge at Pelican event. Now, this is an event obviously that's got Annika Sorensen's name written all over it as one of the greatest women golfers in history. But my God, that's a complicated name for a golf tournament. But ultimately, it's the penultimate stop on this season's LPGA Tour and the last event before their Tour Championships event. The course is 6,349 yards. And has a par of 70, and there's 500 CME Globe points available for the winner, and a purse of $3.25 million. Nelly Calder's won the event 3 out of the last 4 years, but interestingly, this year she's without a win on the LPGA Tour, and quite frankly, no one probably saw that coming, and I certainly didn't. So it would be interesting to see if on a course she obviously loves, at an event that she's won many times, whether this is the week she can pick up the win to stop her basically going the whole of the 2025 season without picking up a victory, which I don't think anybody would have put a bet on at the start of the season. It's going to be a stacked field of the best women golfers in the world. And interestingly, a sponsor's invite has been handed to 18-year-old Kai Trump, who's President Trump's granddaughter. So expect there to be plenty of buzz around the tournament, and it will be great to see it on TV. Right, well, that's about it for the first week of the Pro Golf with Grahame podcast. Obviously, we're coming towards the end of the season, but we've got 2 big Tour Championships still left to play. That's the DP World Tour next week and the LPGA Tour the week after that. And also, we've got then the outcome of the players that are trying to keep their jobs on the PGA Tour by finishing in the top 100. We then hit the Hero Championships at the start of December, which will pull out a few of the big names just before Christmas. And then it won't be long before we're back at the new season and we can start to look forward to the tournaments coming up and start to build up on the channel towards the first major and the Players' Championship. As we go through December and before we hit the new year and the new season, I'll do some recaps of each of the tours. We'll look at some of the defining statistics that have made the tours what they are, and we'll do like reviews of who won what, when, and what were the big massive news stories of the year across all of the major tours. So I'll see you next week for a review of the Butterfield, the DP World Tour Championships and the ANNIKA event, and we'll look forward to the RSM Classic, the final event of the FedEx Full Series, and the CME Globe Tour Championships on the LPGA Tour, as well as any breaking news from around professional golf. Thanks for watching on YouTube or listening on the YouTube Music app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm Grahame, and I'll catch you on the course soon.